Swapan Dasgupta, one of the points of criticism of the opposition has been that the government hasn't done enough when it comes to providing cash in the hands of the poor, those who are dispossessed. A report from the Center of Monitoring of the Indian Economy says unemployment is now at 23%. That's more than 3 times a 40-year high. P. Chidambaram, the former finance minister, Jean Reyes, and several others saying the government has the capacity to do much more. So far, they believe it hasn't done enough. How do you respond to that, sir?
Well, I don't disagree with the fundamental notion that we need to break out of the old mold of regulating the fiscal deficit. And I think that's really the biggest political decision which has got to be taken, and I think the consensus for it exists across party lines. So that's the first step. Once you take that decision, and I think that decision in principle has really been taken, it hasn't been formally announced. The second point, which I also don't disagree with some of the opposition points, is that much more needs to be done. But the important thing is that you need to have it completely targeted. And I think one of the biggest problems which we have faced in this targeting is how do you identify the urban poor? You've got the Jan Dhan accounts as one form, but the Jan Dhan accounts actually cover a far more. Secondly, the point is there are people who were normally, before this crisis broke out, actually employed, albeit on a casual basis, in various sectors. Now, because of this crisis, they've been thrown out of jobs. They're not destitute in that absolute sense, but they're living something. How do you get the absolute mechanism in which direct benefit payments can be made to the really the needy? And I think this is the mechanism why there's been a delay in actually handing over this much money to need it most. Rural areas are well catered for. There's been no talk about rural distress as yet. I think there are problems which are coming, there are challenges, I would say, which are coming up in terms of the harvesting season, etc., which will be met. But in terms of the urban poor, in the urban who are the less well off, let's put it this way, and those who've been dislocated by the corona lockdown, I think the targeting is something being worked on, and you could say that, well, it should have been there earlier. But the point is, it's something which is done, but I hope that by the 13th, before the lockdown is, this particular phase of the lockdown is over, Prime Minister will actually, through either directly or through the Finance Minister or some other ministers, be able to some of them. So I think the basic concerns of both the opposition and the government are exactly the same. The opposition is saying, you should have done it by now. The government is saying, yes, we could have done it, but there are these problems. And I think
Manish Tewari, there were many, sir, in the opposition who questioned when all those Jan Dhan accounts were being opened with zero balance. What the Jam Trinity did was create an architecture with which direct benefit transfers have been sent. I saw some images from Florida, huge queues as people were lining up for their unemployment benefits. In India, money going straight into accounts. How do you believe, since you think so much of policy planning, how do you believe we should address the issue of the urban poor who've been dispossessed at this time? They don't come under the Kisan Yojana. We can't map them so quickly and have money sent into them. Ordinarily, as Swapan Dasgupta says, they do not well, but they survive. Now suddenly they're dispossessed and unemployment in India is at a historic high. How should we address that challenge? What view do you have to offer, sir?
Well, I think that is going to be a fundamental challenge going forth. So therefore, you will really have to put them into 2 separate buckets. One is all those dispossessed migrants, who walked hundreds of kilometers back home because completely heartless and soulless cities just decided to abandon them to their fate. And so therefore, as they get back home, you will have to see as to whether they have those Jan Dhan accounts whereby you will be able to provide them with a certain amount of relief which they require at this point in time. Second would be with regard to the urban poor, and that's where your Panchayati Raj institutions, your municipal corporations, your municipal councils, your councillors and your ward officers will have an extremely important role to play, because you will have to physically map out each and every person or each and every family which requires succor in this day of destitution and distress. And then you would have to ensure that either they have bank accounts or there are other means which are made available in order to see that money or aid is transferred to them. But to Swapan's point that rural distress has not as yet manifested itself, I would respectfully disagree. I represent a parliamentary constituency which is predominantly rural, with small urban agglomerations dotting it, and there is a problem on the ground. At this point in time, villagers are helping out the rural poor. They are trying to provide food grains, and they are trying to provide cooked food from their own resources. At some point in time, government is also chipping in, but what has also happened is that each village has been almost converted into a quasi republic, with villagers having barricaded it because they do not want outsiders, or they do not want anybody who's carrying the virus to really come into their village, who's not a part of their community or their milieu. So therefore, there is going to be difficulties even in terms of accessing villages if, God forbid, the pandemic rate or the rate of infection goes up. And as I was currently looking at the figures, while in percentage terms as compared to the total population of India, they mercifully remain low. But if you look at the trajectory over the last 5 to 10 days or 2 weeks, the trajectory should start worrying people.